All right, you have reached rule number 5, which means that we are on the home stretch. This is the last essential rule of tantrum hacking. And this one is actually not going to take place during the tantrum. This is how we hack tantrums long into the future so that we don't have to have the same fights with our kids 100 times. And to understand why we do this, we're going to talk a little bit more about the brain. So rule number 5, I should say, is reprocess the tantrum down the road. Reprocess the tantrum down the road. And the reason that we do this is because our brains our brains inherently make patterns. This is what they do. They are just pattern-oriented, meaning-making machines. And your kids' brains take a lot longer to make certain patterns, and they're a lot more efficient at making other patterns. But a lot of the things that happen with tantrums actually usually take your kids quite a few times before they understand exactly how to navigate big, complex feelings, how to calm themselves down instead of having to have you calm them down and integrate with them. And if you're wondering up to this point, am I setting my kid up to not be able to self-regulate if I'm helping them regulate? No, it's the exact opposite. You are teaching them how to regulate. And this is why we are talking about rule number 5. As you have gone through all of these steps, even through that step 3, which I said you shouldn't use every time. As you have gone through these steps, don't throw more fuel on their fire. Don't stand over them and domineer and cause issues. Instead, listen and observe, have them be able to speak their voice. If need be, put their prefrontal cortex back in the driver's seat for a second. And don't fight with them when they're in their amygdala. Don't do that. Don't fight with their lizard. As you're doing these things and as you're kind of leading them back into a state of integration and harmony, as their brain is starting to, turn itself back on, their neural cortex is turning itself back on, and they're starting to think rationally about these things. They are internalizing that as the whole journey. They're internalizing that as, this is how I felt, this is what I needed to do in order to calm down, and this is now how I feel going forward. And that whole process of creating that pattern is creating a neural network for them to be able to draw on later. So you're not setting them up for failure. In fact, you're doing the opposite. You're setting them up for success. You're teaching their brain, you're training their brain how to get through a tantrum. So why do we reprocess it later? We reprocess it later because when I talk about stuff at the Whole Parent Academy, I am all about efficiency and I am all about effectiveness. Do you need to do this step? Absolutely not. You can turn this right off right now and just go, you know what? I got them through their tantrum, fine. My goal is to set you up to not have the same tantrum as many times as other people are going to have that tantrum. And one way to do that is that we can actually hack their brain in one other way, a beautiful way, in order to get the most positive experience out of that tantrum. The truth is, if you haven't gotten to this point yet, based on what I just said, understand this. Every opportunity, every tantrum is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to train your kid's brain to integrate and self-regulate, that they are going to be indebted to you when they're 30, 40 years old in a meeting where somebody says the wrong thing and triggers them and they can self-regulate down rather than fly off at that person. They're going to be indebted to you in those moments that you were intentional to do this and that you didn't just command and demand every single time they were dysregulated and they got into their feelings and their emotions. So how do we do this even better? We revisit the things down the road. We actually tell the story of the tantrum when they're in a completely fine and regulated state. I like to do it when they're playing with toys that are like kind of meditative toys. Kids get into these meditative states, which is super, super good for their brains, especially when they're building. Like if they're building with blocks and they're like kind of seeing it, they'll lose themselves in the time, right? They're building with magnet tiles, they're coloring, doing something like that. Whenever they get into those states, they're in a state of kind of prime receptivity. And what we do in those moments, or what we can do in those moments, is we can utilize those moments to reprocess something that we want them to really internalize. So they're sitting there coloring, or they're sitting there building with their blocks or their Legos or whatever, and you just say, hey bud, do you remember when you were like really upset yesterday or last week or whatever about your ice cream cone falling on the floor? Do you remember that? You remember how that felt? Yeah, what were some of the things you were thinking? And now you're guiding them through this, right? You're not telling the story for them. You're assisting them in telling the story. And it's very possible that they're gonna have a really disjointed, garbled memory of this, because like I said, their memory systems were not online for that whole time, right? So you who were online, or your memory systems were, you're gonna help guide them through that. And so you say, oh yeah, and then this, and then remember I talked to you about this and I was listening to you and you said this? They're like, oh yeah, I do remember, I did say that. And then you kind of go down the road a little bit and remember what happened at the end? When you calmed down and we got another ice cream cone, or when you calmed down and we realized that we could get ice cream tomorrow, or whatever the thing is. And you end the story with a positive resolution. What this does when they're in these supremely receptive states is it actually plays their brain through the whole tantrum, and it triggers the electrical signals in their brain that are responsible for the memories that you are processing with them. So as you're saying, do you remember when you got really upset? If you had an EEG strapped to their brain, you could look at all the little electroactivity inside their brain, you'd see that their amygdala would light up a little bit, would start to signal a little bit. Hey, I'm thinking about when I was active the other day, that lizard, is sleeping and it's just kind of peeking up his eye and looking around a little bit. And so when you walk their brain through it, now it's not gonna fly off, hopefully. If it was really traumatic, absolutely, it can just hijack them right away. This is why therapists have very good ways of going through this. We could talk about this in another class. Parents actually can be some of the best therapists for their kids if they know how to, cut this off and stop and pull back before it sends your kid into a spiral over a traumatic event. But as you're reprocessing that with them, especially these kind of small innocuous tantrums that they have, which don't feel small to them, but are small in the grand scheme of things, as you're processing that with them, all of those brain signals are firing, and they're essentially, I know this is gonna kind of melt your brain a little bit, melts mine, maybe this is not new to you. They're essentially having a tantrum in this completely controlled environment, as far as their brain is concerned. They're going through the whole gamut of that experience internally through visualization and memory and story. And what happens when you do that is essentially you cross off another tantrum that they were going to have. I know that sounds crazy, but there's kind of like, and this isn't exactly accurate, but there's kind of a number of tantrums that your kid has to have. And it's obviously different for every kid, and it's different for every different stimulation that they have. Well, maybe they stop having tantrums about that type of thing, but they still have tantrums about this type of thing. And all of us still have, like I said, we all still have tantrums even into adulthood. Hopefully not as many as our toddlers, but all the videos of Karen I see on the internet, some people are still basically just toddlers, right? They haven't fulfilled their tantrum quota yet before they've gotten out of it, and they're probably too old to actually be getting any good out of that tantrum at that point. But with your kid, if they had to do, let's say, 100 tantrums over things, kind of spilled milk type stuff. They had to do 100 of those. Yeah, you navigated like a pro with steps 1 through 4, what I just talked about, right? You navigated 1. But now you reprocess that with them 1, 2 times maybe. Don't overdo it. Don't be talking to them about it every single second of every single day, trying to, optimize the number of tantrums you can eliminate off the list. But you do this 1 or 2 times, now you just cross off a couple of tantrums that you now no longer have to navigate, because they were in this supremely receptive state, and you were able to walk them through the visualization of, hey, this is what it feels like to feel dysregulated and then to feel calmed down, to feel disintegrated and then feel reintegrated. This is what it feels like for your brain to go through this process and come out on the other side. And you know what? There was still more ice cream in the freezer. There was still another ice cream date in the future. And you know what's even better? You know what's the best possible thing you could do in that moment is really cement that teaching moment and that reprocessing moment. Go get an ice cream cone right in that second. And all the moms out here who are like super anti-sugar are like losing their mind at me right now. You can give your kid ice cream now and again. It's not a big deal. Like, Just go through this with them, walk them through this. And when you come out on the other side, cement that. Hey, and remember, there was always more ice cream, so it was okay. You didn't actually need to have that tantrum, but it's okay that you did. It's okay that your brain is in the place where you are. Don't use this as an opportunity to shame your kid. Use this as an opportunity to celebrate your kid, that they went from a disintegrated state to an integrated state, to a dysregulated state to a regulated state, from their lizard brain to their neural cortex, to their, them being their full self. Celebrate that with your kid. Celebrate that progress and that process with your kid. And what you'll see is that reprocessing saves you on a whole lot of headache later. And that's it. That's all 5 steps. You have them now. So I'll do a little wrap up thing here in a second, but you've made it. Just go through them. Nail them one after another. You'll be a pro.